There's something dangerous about old flames. The way they flicker in the back of your mind, always just a spark away from igniting into something powerful. I never thought I'd see him again, not after everything that happened, not after the way we ended. But there I was, standing in front of him, in the very same bar we used to frequent. The years had softened the edges of our past, or perhaps the absence had created a longing, an ache that neither of us could ignore. As soon as our eyes met, the world around us seemed to stop. Time didn't matter. The space between us shrank until it felt like no distance had ever been there at all. He looked different, older in a way that made him more intriguing. The hard lines of his jaw, the slight graying at his temples, all the things that should have made him more distant only made him more familiar, more desirable. I swallowed, feeling a tension I hadn't expected. The years had done nothing to diminish the pull between us. If anything, they had only intensified it, like an unspoken invitation to step into the fire we had once shared, but never fully explored. "Long time no see," he said, his voice a low rasp, sending shivers down my spine. I tried to mask the sudden rush of heat in my chest. "Yeah, a long time." We stood there for a moment, neither of us quite knowing what to do next. There was so much unspoken history between us, so many emotions tangled up in the mess of what we had been, what we had lost, and what we might still have. And yet, despite everything, I couldn't stop the pull, couldn't stop the way my heart raced at the sound of his voice, at the way he was looking at me like he hadn't ever truly let go. "I didn't think you'd be here," he said, taking a step closer. "I thought I had lost you." I felt a strange pang at his words. I had tried to let go of him. I had to. The relationship we had was intense, reckless at times, and had ended in a way that left a scar deep enough to make me hesitate. But standing here, so close to him again, that hesitation was slipping away, fading into the desire that simmered between us. "I didn't think I'd be here either," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But here I am." He smiled, a little too knowingly, as if he knew exactly what was happening between us. The air felt thick with tension, and I could see the same storm brewing behind his eyes, the same fire that had once consumed us. Without another word, he reached for my hand, his touch sending a rush of warmth through me. And for a moment, I allowed myself to lean into the temptation, letting the past rush back with a flood of memories. The way he used to touch me, the way his lips would brush against my neck as he whispered my name, the way he made me feel like I was the only person in the world, even if it was only for a brief, stolen moment. Before I could stop myself, I was following him out the door, down a narrow alleyway that led to an old apartment building we had once shared for a short time. It felt like fate, or maybe just bad judgment, but there was something irresistible about the pull between us. Something that made me forget everything I had learned, all the ways I had tried to move on. When you've loved someone like I had loved him, it's hard to forget. Hard to pretend that you didn't want what you once had, no matter the consequences. Inside his apartment, the air was charged with an electric tension. He closed the door behind us, and we both stood there for a moment, as though waiting for something. I could feel his breath on my skin, could hear the rapid beat of his heart in time with mine. There was no going back now. He stepped closer, his hands reaching for me as though we were both afraid to touch, yet desperate for the connection. And when our lips finally met, it was like a match being struck, igniting everything we had once shared, and more. The kiss was slow at first, as though we were both feeling our way back to each other. But then, as if our bodies remembered what our minds had tried to forget, the kiss deepened, and I was lost in the taste of him. The familiar, intoxicating taste of someone I had loved so fiercely, someone I had never really stopped loving. His hands trembled as they cupped my face, his breath hot against my lips, our foreheads pressed together as if he was still trying to convince himself this was real. That I was real. "Tell me this isn't a mistake," he whispered, his voice raw with longing. I swallowed, my fingers tracing the line of his jaw, feeling the slight stubble beneath my touch. "If this is a mistake," I murmured, "then I never want to be right again." And then there was no more hesitation. He crashed into me, his hands roaming, desperate to claim what had always been his. I gasped against his lips as he pressed me back against the wall, his body molding against mine, heat radiating between us like a fever we couldn't shake. "God, I missed you," he groaned, his lips trailing down my throat, sucking, biting, leaving invisible marks only I would know were there. I tugged at his shirt, my hands splaying over his bare chest, feeling the erratic thrum of his heartbeat beneath my palms. He was solid and strong, and yet, in this moment, just as vulnerable as I was. We stumbled backward, hands frantic, mouths never parting as we made our way to the bed. The back of my knees hit the edge, and I fell, pulling him down with me. His weight pressed me into the mattress, his thigh sliding between mine, and I gasped at the contact. "Say my name," I begged, my fingers digging into his back. His lips brushed against my ear. I never stopped saying it. And then he was everywhere. His hands, his mouth, his body, all consuming, claiming, worshipping. Every moan, every shudder, every whispered confession was a promise. A promise that this time, neither of us was letting go. The years between us disappeared in an instant, and there was only the heat of our bodies pressing together, the desperate need to make up for lost time. His hands slid down my back, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. I could feel his body against mine, hard and real, and my own responded in kind, a rush of heat flooding me. The world outside seemed distant, irrelevant. All that mattered was him, and the fire that had never truly gone out. He pulled away just long enough to look at me, his eyes searching mine, filled with something I couldn't quite name. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice thick with desire. I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I whispered, my fingers tugging at his shirt, desperate to feel him closer. "I'm sure." And with that, we moved together, shedding the layers that separated us, our bodies reconnecting in a way that felt both new and painfully familiar. It was slow, deliberate, as though we were savoring the moment, the taste of each other. And yet, beneath that tenderness, there was an urgency, a hunger that had been lying dormant for too long. His lips were soft against mine, and I couldn't help but lose myself in the kiss. There was an urgency to it, like we had both been waiting for this moment for far too long. I could feel his hands tracing my sides, as though committing every curve of my body to memory. His touch ignited something deep inside me, a desire I had buried for years. The heat between us was unbearable, a fire neither of us had the will to extinguish. His hands gripped my waist, fingers digging in as if afraid I might slip away. I moaned into his mouth, my body molding against his, my breath coming in short, desperate gasps.
His fingers trailed down my back, slow and teasing, sending shivers down my spine. I arched into him, craving more, needing more. His teeth grazed my jaw, then my neck, his lips pressing open-mouthed kisses down to my collarbone. Each touch was a memory, a whisper of the past colliding with the present, the ache of years spent apart manifesting in the way he clung to me now. "Tell me you want this," he murmured against my skin, his voice rough, his breath hot. I met his gaze, dark and filled with hunger. I never stopped. His hands moved lower, gripping my thighs as he lifted me effortlessly, pinning me against the wall. A gasp escaped me, but it quickly turned into a groan as his lips claimed mine again, more urgent, more demanding. My fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, deepening the kiss until there was nothing left between us but need. Time blurred as we stumbled toward the bed, the city lights outside casting shadows across his face, highlighting the sharpness of his jaw, the intensity in his eyes. He hovered over me, taking in every inch of my body as though committing me to memory. "You're mine," he whispered, his voice a mix of reverence and possession. I smirked, reaching up to pull him down to me. "Then take what's yours." And so he did. He took my 10-inch tool in his soft palms and started stroking it. Then he knelt down and took my tool into his mouth, using his tongue to fill the first part of my rod and then taking the rest in like a lollipop. It was too good. He definitely got better during the years apart. I screamed, groaned, called his name, grabbed the sheets, held his head. The pleasure was massive. I was about to explode. I couldn't get enough of him. The way his body responded to mine, the way he made me feel alive, like I was finally in the right place, after all these years of wondering. My hands were eager to roam, touching his chest, feeling the firm muscle beneath his shirt. I could feel the heat radiating off of him, and the desire between us grew stronger with every second that passed. He groaned softly as my fingers traced the outline of his jaw, and when he pulled back slightly, I caught a glimpse of the hunger in his eyes, a reflection of my own. "God, I've missed you," he whispered, his voice hushed, almost reverent. The words sent a shiver down my spine, and I couldn't help but smile, a quiet laugh escaping my lips. "I've missed you too," I whispered back, my voice barely audible, as though speaking too loud might shatter the fragile moment we had created. His lips found mine again, this time more insistent, as though he couldn't wait any longer. His hands slid to my waist, pulling me flush against him. The feeling of his body, solid and warm, was intoxicating, and I pressed myself closer, if that was even possible. I could feel the steady thrum of his heartbeat against my chest, and it only fueled the fire that burned between us. I could sense his desire, his need, and it mirrored my own. Everything else, all the time that had passed between us, felt irrelevant. All that mattered was the way our bodies moved together, the way the kiss seemed to speak volumes of the things we had never said. Our lips parted for a moment, and I gasped softly, not wanting the connection to break, but needing the space to breathe, to think, even if just for a moment. "Are you sure?" he asked again, his voice low. I nodded, my fingers threading through his hair as I pulled him back to me. "I've never been more sure of anything," I said, my voice thick with desire. He didn't need any more encouragement. His hands moved to the hem of my shirt, lifting it slowly, almost reverently, as though he was afraid to rush. I helped him, lifting my arms so he could pull it off. When the shirt was discarded, he paused for a moment, looking at me as if he couldn't believe I was really here, that this was happening. The intensity in his gaze made my heart race, and I reached out, my hands trailing over his chest, feeling the solid muscle beneath my fingertips. "I've missed this," I murmured, my voice breathless, almost desperate, as my fingers traced the hard lines of his abdomen. My hands trembled slightly, not from hesitation, but from the sheer weight of the moment. The heat between us was electric, charged with something far deeper than just longing. It was hunger, an ache that had been left unsatisfied for far too long. He let out a low, guttural sound, his own need mirroring mine. His hands, rough yet familiar, roamed over my skin, mapping every inch as if he was trying to memorize me all over again. My fingers curled into the waistband of his trousers, pulling insistently, not needing to ask. He understood. We had always understood each other in ways words could never express. His breath was hot against my neck as he leaned in, his lips grazing my skin, sending shivers rippling down my spine. The air between us thickened, heavy with tension, with unspoken confessions buried beneath every fevered touch. My pulse pounded, a frantic rhythm that matched the way our bodies moved, urgent, desperate, lost in the pull of something we could never resist. The moment his bare skin met mine, I gasped. It was fire and ice, a collision of heat and need that stole the breath from my lungs. I felt him everywhere, his hands, his lips, the steady, intoxicating weight of him pressing against me. It was like the world outside had ceased to exist, leaving only us, tangled together in the kind of passion that felt like both a surrender and a victory. I clung to him, nails digging into his back, as if I could hold onto this moment forever, as if letting go would mean losing something vital. He groaned against my mouth, his body pressing me further into the mattress, and I knew we were past the point of no return. We moved together, slow at first, exploring each other's bodies as if we had all the time in the world. His lips never left mine, and every kiss was like a promise, a reaffirmation of everything we had once been, everything we could still be. Each caress, each kiss, was like a thread weaving us back together, healing the wounds we had both carried for so long. He pulled back briefly, looking into my eyes with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Are you sure this is what you want?" His voice was hoarse now, thick with desire, and I could feel the tension building between us. I had never been more certain of anything in my life. "Yes," I said, but my conviction was clear. "I want this. I want you." His lips crashed into mine again, and this time there was no hesitation, only raw, unfiltered need. His hands threaded into my hair, gripping just tight enough to make me gasp against his mouth. The urgency between us was unmistakable, but beneath the hunger, there was something deeper, something we had both been running from. We moved together, our bodies finding a rhythm that was both familiar and brand new, a slow, deliberate dance of rediscovery. His hands roamed over my skin, relearning the contours of my body with a touch that sent shivers cascading through me. Every press of his fingers, every brush of his lips against mine, felt like an unspoken apology, a confession of all the words we had left unsaid. I arched into him, my nails dragging down his back, desperate to pull him closer. He groaned, the sound reverberating through my chest, igniting something primal inside me. The heat between us built steadily, spreading like wildfire, consuming everything in its path. Yet, it wasn't just passion. It was something far more dangerous, something we had both tried to bury beneath time and distance. But there was no burying this, no escaping it. Each kiss was a rekindling, a resurrection of something that had never truly died. It had only lain dormant, waiting for the right moment to awaken. And now, with every breath, every touch, we shattered the illusion that we had ever moved on. Because this, us, was inevitable. As the night stretched on, we lost ourselves in each other, in the fire that had never fully burned out. Every touch, every whispered name, felt like a promise, one we had been too afraid to make before. But here, in the hush of the night, with nothing but the warmth of our bodies and the steady rhythm of our heartbeats filling the space between us, there was no more doubt, no more fear. I traced my fingers along the curve of his jaw, memorizing every line, every detail I had once thought I would have to forget. His eyes, dark and filled with emotion, locked onto mine, and in that moment I knew this was home. He leaned in, his lips brushing against mine with a tenderness that stole my breath, as if he was sealing the night's unspoken vows into every kiss. We held each other long after the passion had faded into quiet contentment, limbs tangled, skin warm and flushed. His fingers danced lazily over my back, tracing patterns I couldn't decipher but never wanted him to stop. I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady thrum of his heart, a sound I wanted to hear for the rest of my life. "I don't want to lose you again," he murmured into my hair, his voice thick with emotion. I lifted my head, meeting his gaze. "You won't," I promised, my voice unwavering. "Not this time." And I meant it. Because this time, we weren't running. This time, we weren't letting doubt or fear steal what was meant to be ours. We had fought against the pull of each other for too long, convinced ourselves it was easier to stay apart, but love, real love, was relentless. It waited. It endured. And now, it had found us again. The first light of dawn crept through the curtains, casting a soft glow over us, illuminating the truth we had tried so hard to ignore. There was no more pretending, no more hiding. This wasn't just a rekindling. This was the beginning of forever.